Okay, hi. I'll try to speak loudly and clearly and slowly so you are sure to understand everything I have to say. It's really a great privilege and honor to be here, and I appreciate you taking out your time to hear me out today, because we're really going to go outside the box. Are you ready for that? Okay. So I like the title of this series, and it's appropriate. I want to begin just by asking 3 or 4 of you a question, and I want you to think somewhat deeply about it, but I only need a 2-3 word answer. One might do. So this will happen very quickly, and we'll start from that. And I just want to ask you, start with you, who are you? Who are you?
You want to hear my name?
I don't want your name, I don't want your social security number or email. I want you to think about something that describes you in a deep, descriptive way.
What to say?
Okay, well, you have various roles that you play in life. Are you a father?
Yes.
A professor?
Yes.
A Christian? A Muslim? Okay. What would you say is most important? So, along that vein.
Father.
A father, okay? Your father. How about you? Who are you? Interesting, no one knows who they are.
There's so many different answers.
Right. Give me one that's important to you. If someone were to say to me, who are you? I would say, easy question. I'm a writer, a philosopher, and an activist. Who are you?
I'm a student.
You're a student. Okay. That's good enough. And we'll do one more. Who are you? Yes, you.
I'm human.
A student too.
No, human.
A human.
Yeah, this is sociologist.
Interesting. Okay. Because that's taking me to where I want to go. Because usually we will say that we are a male, a female, a feminist, an anti-racist, a radical, a conservative, homosexual, heterosexual, male, female, Christian, Muslim, professor, student, something like that. And that's how we identify ourselves in the world. But rarely do we think that we are a human. And that is because we take this for granted. Now, if I ask you, who are you as a human, of course the answer has to be that I am an animal. Specifically, I am a primate. Or in Jared Diamond's terms, I am the 3rd chimpanzee. The common chimpanzee, the bonobo, and Homo sapiens. Who are you? I am Homo sapiens. I'm a human being. I'm a human animal, as opposed to a non-human animal. So the question I want to raise is, who is Homo sapiens? Who is the human being? What is the human being? How can we know? Do we know? Do we have any idea of who we are as individuals of a given species? Now, humans have been thinking for quite some time on this planet. Language evolved 40 to 50,000 years ago. Philosophy is at least 2,500, 3,000 years old. We certainly have a rich history of philosophy, theology, and science. And I want to say something provocative just to start with. We have not, until recently, had the slightest idea of who we are as individuals of an animal species called Homo sapiens. We have not had any clue who we are. And so that's the paradox. A lot of verbiage, tons of books, all the world's great thinkers, and everyone was wrong. No one got it right, almost no one. Some people got glimmers of the truth. But most all the thinkers in the Western tradition, and I would add mostly the Eastern tradition too, got this question wrong, completely wrong. And so we've grown up, we've been miseducated into this fantasy ideal of who we are as an animal, and we have been told some very flattering things, but it proves that they are almost all wrong. Now, I don't mean any slight to people who are religious, but I don't think religion can answer this question. Philosophy has a lot to say in terms of its critical capacities. Ultimately, this has a lot to do with science. It's a scientific question. And the science of Homo sapiens and the history, archaeology, anthropology, genetics, paleontology, etc., are starting to become sophisticated enough that we have a glimmer of who we are. We did not have a clue until 1859, when Darwin published Origin of the Species, that we were animals that evolved like all other animals. And although there were ideas of evolution that go all the way back to the pre-Socratics, it was really only in 1859 we began to think accurately about who and what we are. So that's the paradox. Homo sapiens, wise man, not so wise, able to understand lots of things and even master complex technologies, but only recently gaining some knowledge into who we are as a distinct or unique species. That's the paradox. And now there's an irony. The irony is, just as we are about to learn who we are, just as we begin to look into that mirror and see an accurate reflection, we are starting to change, and the world is starting to change. We live in a world in crisis where our own existence is imperiled. Our closest biological relatives are about to go extinct, and we will lose a lot of potential knowledge about our evolutionary past and our biological nature if that happens. And if we have a nature, and that's one of my questions, do we have a human nature? If we have one, is it changeable? Because the irony is, it seems we are on the threshold of having the capacity to change our nature, if indeed we have one. Now, I consider myself a leftist in my politics. I began as a Marxist, evolved more towards an anarchist position. But from the left tradition, you see there's no such thing as human nature. Because that's a social construct, and people are different in different societies. And leftists don't like to say human nature because that implies something negative, and that usually is associated with conservative values. Human nature. Human beings are violent. Human beings are competitive. Human beings are hierarchical. So the order that we have today in capitalist society is perfectly natural. It reflects our nature as animals. We can't change it. Don't even try to change the status quo. We are status quo seeking animals. So the question of human nature has always been bound up with right-wing or conservative values. But as I started thinking more about this, I could see that the left-wing response to this was a fantasy, a humanist fantasy. Our evolution as animals goes back 5 to 7 million years ago. We climbed out of the trees in East or Central Africa into the savannas. Our bodies began to undergo some dramatic change. We stood up on 2 feet and became bipedal animals. The first form of that is called Australopithecines. We evolved from Australopithecine to various types of Homo. That's our genus, Homo. And that took us to the current point. That happened 5 to 7 million years ago. Now, if you believe that we can live for 5 to 7 million years before we even evolve a language, and you don't think we have a human nature, a basic nature within us, I think you're deluded, because we are not infinitely plastic. We are not able to be shaped into anything. We have an animalic past in us that runs back 5 to 7 million years ago. So we are fundamentally animals. Whatever sociological or cultural overlay we put on that, we are animals with a basic nature. And the more I looked into that nature, the less attractive the human species seemed to me. Now, so I say we have a nature, but I'm going to also say it is socially constructed at the same time. And I want to begin with this irony that it seems like even if we have a nature, we are about to change it. We have pharmacology, the science of drugs, medicine such as Prozac, which can change your personality, can change your sense of self. And so neurologists and scientists are asking the old philosophical question, what is the self? Do we have a self? If we can take a drug and change our personality? So we get into the Brave New World type of scenario where we engineer human personalities through chemicals and we become different human beings. We have cloning. Cloning actually is not very radical, it's just weird. You replicate yourself, you don't modify human nature, you just create a copy of it, so to speak. We are using cloning techniques far and wide in agriculture and also with plants. We have genetically modified plants, genetically modified farm animals, and then we clone the best of that lot. And these animals are programmed to become as large and fat and grow as fast as possible to supply the insatiable demand that human beings have to consume the flesh of another animal. I don't think it's impossible that we could use genetic engineering on ourselves. We have been hesitant to use cloning on ourselves because the death rate of cloning animals is incredibly high. The failure rate is very high. But it's quite possible, we have experimented with these techniques, it's quite possible there is somewhere an island of Dr. Moreau where there are mutant forms of life, part human, part monster, if you will. It's entirely possible. We can create hybrid species. We can take the cells of human DNA, put them in a petri dish with the cells of a cow, and let it grow for up to 2 weeks legally in some countries. And they're doing this in Korea and elsewhere. That's a hybrid. That's a different kind of species. What happens when we create the human Z? Half human, half chimpanzee. If we create such an animal, what would that be like? If we can genetically modify our nature, do we have a basic nature? So you see, there's lots of advances in science and technology that, even if we have a nature, allow us perhaps to alter this. And so you have the example of the film Gattaca, where human beings have split into 2 branches of evolution. You have the normal types, like all of us here, and then you have the modified types. And the modified types are the ones with the extra powers, the athletic powers, the additional brain power, and you have a new caste, a new form of discrimination based upon genetic superiority. So these are all possibilities. Now, so although I believe we have a biological nature, I've said it is socially constructed. That means the way we have interpreted ourselves as animals is a social, cultural, and linguistic product. It goes back to the beginning of language 40 to 50,000 years ago. We have never stopped thinking about it. We have thought about it in different cultures and different languages from different perspectives. And we have come to basically some very similar conclusions. Homo sapiens is an animal that is considered to be radically unique. Now, that's redundant. because by definition, a species is a species that is unique from other species. So to say that human beings are unique, as people like to say, it's to say nothing. Of course we're unique. A squirrel is unique, a rat is unique, a dog is unique by definition. But somehow we are so unique, we're different from all these other animals, radically different. And we are unique by defining ourselves in a certain way, and that is as a rational essence. And this has been so well articulated in the Western philosophical tradition, from Plato to Aquinas, from Aristotle to Descartes, Kant, and beyond. We still think this is common sense. We are the rational animal. Now, we began to construct ourselves as a certain type of species, I would say, with perhaps the first and one of the most monumental revolutions in history. If I ask you, what are the main revolutions in history, you might say industrial capitalism. Actually, industrial capitalism is a variation on a theme. The theme is agricultural society. Agricultural society emerged 10,000 years ago. And it emerged when we made that shift from over 90% of our history, from hunting and gathering tribes that moved nomadically, that lived off of the bodies of scavenged animals or dead animals. That's how we ate a lot of our meat. We didn't hunt it. We maybe hunted small animals. We gathered a lot of crops. There's this idea of man the hunter that is a myth, because we haven't always been hunters. Man has not played so important a role in history that we can ignore what women have done as gatherers. So agricultural society, which I'll come back to, was a clear rupture. And I think it was a growth-oriented society, and capitalism is just a variation on that. But perhaps the turning point in history occurred 60,000 years ago, and that is when we began to develop organized hunting. You see, throughout most of our history, we were not hunters, we were the hunted. We were not predators, we were the prey. We are very weak, frail animals. We lack claws, we lack sharp teeth, we can't run very fast, we're very weak. The only thing we had going was something called a forebrain that was barely developing. Well, once we developed the spear, we could line up in a group of 10 or 20 around a large animal and take that animal down. These animals that used to take us down, we began to take down. And soon extinction crises spread all over the planet everywhere we went, because we killed without any sense of limitation, without any restraint. So I emphasize that because we began to define ourselves apart from other animals. We began to define ourselves not as a part of nature, but apart from nature. And that is a very important part of our identity and how we have constructed ourselves as human beings. We don't consider ourselves to belong to the animal kingdom, or if we do, in such a way that we are just radically unique. We don't consider ourselves to belong to the natural world. After all, we've created culture, which is the antithesis of nature in our minds. But beginning with agricultural society, when we began to domesticate the wild, take plants and grow them, not just take what they gave to us, but to actually grow wheat and corn and other crops through artificial selection, as we came to call it, and to take animals like goats and later cattle and sheep, and to domesticate them, to turn them from wild animals into domesticated animals for human labor purposes. The domestication of the wild defines agricultural society, and we have done this ever since. So we began, you see, to get a sense of our power over other animals, to get a sense that we could manipulate nature and not only be manipulated by it, that we had a special kind of power that made us different from the world and from other animals. Now understand, we used to revere animals. We used to live in very important psychological relationships with animals. You look at early cultures, they're called totemic cultures. That means their identity as a tribe, as a people, came from an animal. We are the bear people. We are the wolf people. The cosmos was populated with spirits. It was an animistic world. It was alive with souls, and we were one soul, commingling with all other souls. But soon we lost our reverence for animals. Soon we began to exploit them and dominate them. Soon they became the largest slave class in history. We use them for food, for transportation, for labor, for clothing, for every imaginable purpose. And we define ourselves apart from them, and they were no longer sacred to us, but objects, resources, property, and commodities. So I suggest this, that we got this idea that we are rational beings. Homo sapiens is a rational animal by sharply distinguishing ourselves from other animals. By saying that these animals do not have the abilities that we have, they do not think rationally or logically, they don't have languages. So our essence is to be the animal that has rationality and language. And we define ourselves as that type, and so we are radically different from all nature and all other animals. And that's what I call the politics of human identity. Because you see, who gets the count as human in this world? That matters a lot. That first hierarchy in history was speciesism. We dominated animals physically. We exploited them as slaves, and we defined them as inferior to us because they lacked rationality. The first philosopher of slavery was Aristotle. Things took the wrong turn in history with Aristotle. One of the first philosophers, Pythagoras, you see, was an amazing man. He's mostly known for mathematics. But much more important to Pythagoras was his theory of diet and his ethics of equality for all life. He insisted that we had no right to injure, kill, or harm other animals. So he was what we would today call an animal rights activist, although, of course, the discourse did not exist. He insisted that the best diet for the human frame was a vegan diet. So on the one hand, we had the Pythagorean tradition. That continued through Neoplatonism, through the Romans, through the Stoics, and into the medieval era, where it was utterly suppressed. It was revived in the early modern tradition by the 17th century. Pythagoreanism as a diet, as an ethic, was considered some of the leading knowledge of the time during the early Enlightenment. That other tradition in Western history was the Aristotelian tradition that said that the universe is constructed in terms of a system of teleology, or purposes, that it is arranged as in a hierarchical form, such that the lower beings serve the needs of the higher beings. So Aristotle said, just as plants serve the needs of animals, so animals serve the needs of human beings. And the most perfect type of being was the most rational being. So short of God, we were the highest and most perfect forms of life because we were rational. We were the rational animal. And that thought goes through medieval thinking. It goes through the early modern tradition. And this is how we have defined ourselves. So no matter where you look in history, as soon as people begin to write, as soon as the philosophers begin to think, you find a certain continuity, a certain pattern. That whether it's ancient society, or medieval society, or modern society, whether it's Western culture or Eastern culture, whether it's philosophy, theology, or science, you find the same thing. We are radically unique to all other forms of life, and we are superior. And in most cases, they exist to serve our purposes. Our purposes are quasi-divine and unquestionable. So there are continuities in what I call the dominator culture. And so by the time we arrive in the 16th century, we had a worldview that was very well established. Now, what I want to do is give you a graphic of what this worldview was and how it became dismantled piece by piece, and how we reacted to this and where we are now. You might be very familiar with this kind of diagram. The medieval worldview, the Christian medieval worldview, can be seen as a series of concentric circles, with God outside the universe, transcended in space and time, having created the universe, and at the center of the universe, of course, is the earth. At the center of the universe in terms of value and importance and divine focus, of course, is humankind. And I'll put man here because this is a patriarchal picture, literally man. Women were considered closer to nature than to culture. The essence of man was reason. Let me say something about that real quick, by the way, that the essence of man is reason, and that led to other forms of hierarchy. Because if we say that our essence as humans is rational, and we can identify a certain class of human beings as less than rational, they're less than human. You go through Western history books and reread what the greats had to say, and they will mostly conclude that women were deficient in rationality. Rousseau, for instance, said women have practical rationality but not theoretical rationality. They can't be philosophers. It's nonsense, but this is how the classic figures thought. So if we can say women don't have rationality, we can say they're subhuman and they belong at the bottom of a hierarchy. If we can say people of color, people from Africa, if Europeans can go on colonial missions and say, these aren't rational people, they're animals, they're savages, they're beasts, they're subhuman, then we can put them in the category of animals where they have no value, and we can do anything we want to them. And there is no moral question about it. And every time there's a war, first the enemy has to be reduced to the status of animal. And this is part, again, of the politics of human identity. Who gets to be called human, and what are the consequences of that? Notice we are talking about an error, a mistake, an illusion. Because it was Nietzsche who taught us that as soon as human beings begin to think, they immediately make mistakes. They immediately make mistakes in cause and effect and all the different fallacies that you identify in logic class. They immediately think to posit God. They anthropomorphize sun god, moon god. They immediately think that somehow they're privileged in the universe. They have irrational fears, etc. Some of these lies are corrected and vanish forever. Some stay with us. The lies that stay with us, the errors that we retain, are the ones, he says, that have utility. They serve our purposes, our pathetic psychological purposes to be demigods on this earth. So any philosophical error that we have created that says that we are rational and that we are special and that everything exists for our purposes, we have retained those errors. So, beginning in 1600, this whole picture was dismantled. And you know the story, just quickly to go over it. So we find a series of what I call discontinuities. A discontinuity is when this picture is torn. And you see, we have a need for meaning, order, and pattern. So if some rude scientist or philosopher comes along and says, this is false, and creates a hole in the fabric, we're going to find a way to repair it. So the Copernican revolution came along first and foremost and said, with the beginning of the scientific revolution, 1600s, that the Earth is not the center of the universe. That's a geocentric worldview. The sun is at the center of the universe. That's a heliocentric worldview. And that idea was fairly destabilizing. It was decentering. There was a discontinuity, a break. That's not what we were taught. This seems to mean we're not favored or privileged in some way. If we're not at the center of the universe and the sun is, and we revolve around the sun, and the sun doesn't revolve around us, this is an uncomfortable thought. Well, we know that there's no center to the universe at all. There may be parallel universes for all we know. We do know, in Carl Sagan's words, that we are nothing but a pale blue dot in this incredible cosmos. Now, his findings, his mathematics were all wrong. He was more tied to the medieval era than to the modern era he helped to begin. Galileo came along with new technologies, telescopes to confirm his findings. Of course, he was forced to recant. And so this hole was left in the picture. I'm only going to read you one quote, a short quote, just to give you an example of how we would respond to this type of destabilizing crack in our universe. Because there's a problem here now if we're not at the center and we have flattered ourselves into thinking everything exists for our purposes. Because we're going to repair any damage and fix this picture until it is put together with Scotch tape and rubber bands. There's a historian named J.D. Barrie who wrote a very nice book about the history of progress. Quickly, he says, after the Copernican revolution, finding himself in an insignificant island floating in the immensity of space, man decides that he is at last the master of his own destinies. He can fling away the old equipment of final causes, Aristotle, original sin, the Bible, and he can now reconstruct his own chart. He is bound by no cosmic scheme. He need not take the universe into account, except as he judges it to exist for his own profit. So look, this is like when Nietzsche said, God is dead. Do not be depressed by this knowledge, be exultant, because never has the sun shone so brightly on any sea. Now that God is dead, man can be born. We can create a humanist culture and get rid of this mediocrity that Christianity has imposed upon us for millennia. So this was kind of repaired. Or we turned a disadvantage into our advantage. Humanism, instead of receiving a proper punishment it deserved, humanism became even more arrogant. Hey, now the whole heavens, the whole universe is something that we can master. We have no limitations. Now people could be fairly comfortable with that. Comfortable, that is, until 1859. Because in 1859 was the Darwinian revolution with the origin of species, and Darwin so rudely came along, and he was so hesitant to say this. He sat on the manuscript for over a decade because he was frightened of what the consequences might be, this subversive knowledge that we are not at the center of the universe. We are animals who take our place side by side with perhaps over 10 million other species, and we evolve according to the same laws of natural selection, of sexual selection, We evolved for no special purpose. There is no teleology. Everything is accidental and, if you will, self-organizing. That knowledge was highly disturbing, and people to this day reject this. It caused the war between religion and science like never before. Notice the difference. In the medieval era, very close to Aristotle's picture, there was something called the Great Chain of Being. You had at the top God, below God angels, then man, animals, plants, minerals, rocks, etc. On the earth, of course, we were master and we were exceeded in perfection and intelligence only by disembodied, pure, rational or soulful spirits. So you can see this linear model of ontology, of the nature of the world, places us up at the top. Indeed, most theories of progress do the same. So what Darwin did in Stephen Jay Gould's metaphor was replace this ladder with a bush. So now we have a picture that looks like this. And all of these lines represent different species. Call this the primordial pool of life, if you will. What life does is speciate. It creates millions and millions of species, all different. And so now here we have Homo sapiens alongside all these other animals. And we have no special place if you just shift the metaphor. You can see this is really much more radically disconcerting than Copernicus. How are we going to deal with this? Darwin also said that animals are different from humans in degree and not kind. He wrote two very important books on ethology, which I'll talk about soon, the study of animal intelligence. He said, animals have more intelligence than we have yet to understand. We have falsely opposed ourselves to the entire animal kingdom. We are different in degree, but not kind. And the way I would put this is everything we have within us, every moral impulse, every feeling, every thought or potential thought was given to us by evolution, by our animal ancestors, by our primate cousins, and by other animals. How do you fix the tear in this picture? Well, first, if you're a scientist, you ignore what Darwin said about animals, humans being like animals, different in degree but not kind. You ignore that and you proceed with your vivisection and your speciesist exploitation, because scientists conveniently overlook that or will emphasize difference in kind over difference in degree. If you're a capitalist, this was perfect. This fed right into the dominator worldview, because now we have this idea that competition is essential for driving life forward. Now, in truth, Darwin emphasized cooperation as just as important as competition. Somehow that got left out. So capitalists took Darwinism and turned it into social Darwinism. And that was the dominant ideology of the capitalist class in the 19th and 20th century. That life is brutal, violent, and competitive, and those who are the fittest, by the way, Darwin never even coined that term, the survival of the fittest, those who are fit will survive. And if you cannot compete in this world, then you do not deserve to live. So Darwinism became appropriated by the dominator culture as an ideology to justify class domination and social elitism. And the whole idea of might is right came about. That became a fascist ideology, and people said, we may have evolved from other animals, but we are special because we clawed our way to the top. And we're special because we have the technologies of power. We have the weapons, the guns, that can kill and control life as we choose. So Darwin got reappropriated into the dominator culture. And that whole, although it exists, was trying to be patched together and somehow to keep the worldview intact, the dominator worldview. Well, of course, in the same century, along came on the heels of Darwin, Nietzsche and Freud. Nietzsche and Freud said they destroyed the Cartesian dualism between man and animal, between body and soul. Nietzsche said, body am I entirely. And towards Descartes' cogito, I think, therefore I am. Nietzsche says, it thinks, therefore I am. In other words, what Freud called the unconscious mind was fully anticipated by Nietzsche, indeed the Romantics. And we are now told that we are animals. We are dominated by irrational impulses, by desires, by instincts that we do not understand, that we cannot control, and we are not rational animals. So what Freud and Nietzsche did was to turn this around so that we are not defined as the rational animal, but as the desiring animal. So again, a very common representation. On the Freudian model, rationality is just the tip of the iceberg, and below this is animality. Everything we deny that we are, everything we try to suppress, and all of the dark elements of human nature, including thanatos, the death instinct, the instinct toward violence, destruction of life, destruction of others, destruction of the self. So we are not a rational essence. We certainly do not have a soul. How can we fix this picture? Well, Nietzsche got appropriated by the fascists. The idea of the Übermensch, the Superman, became the German culture. And Nietzsche was no anti-Semite, and this was a grotesque distortion of his work. Freud, interestingly, was divided. Freud was half anti-enlightenment, half a pro-enlightenment, because Freud says we can master this through rationality with science. That science is psychoanalysis. So Freud said at the very same time, we are not captains of the ship. The ego is not the captain of the ship, but it can be made to be if we gain self-knowledge through psychoanalysis. So we had to do some damage control. The repair was basically fixed. Okay? Now, one more revolution that came along that's worth noting commonly is the revolution of artificial intelligence. Beginning perhaps by the 1950s, of course, through the present moment, computers became more powerful, ever faster, ever smaller. They began to interface with our bodies. They clearly could outperform us in certain tasks. When a Russian chess master loses to a computer in a chess game, you know that in some sense a machine is more intelligent than a human being. So pretty soon we're going to find ourselves as humans bounded by intelligence on both sides. On the one hand, we're going to learn that other animals have intelligence, have minds too, and that machines have kinds of minds. We are not unique in having minds or intelligence. This was fairly easy to control, although it haunted our subconscious. Because after all, we created computers. We're the smart people who created these things smarter than us. There's a group of thinkers, if you don't know about their work, you might find very interesting. They're called transhumanists. Transhumanists are almost neo-Cartesians. Some transhumanists are merely interested in longevity and any technological device that will enhance and extend our life. Some go so far as to say we can have immortality by transferring our consciousness onto a computer tape. The body is superfluous. We should have no nostalgia for the body. Give up the body. It's an old, broken down, carbon-based mechanism. don't need it. The essence of us, in other words, again, is thought to be our mind. And you can put your mind on a computer tape and live forever. People literally are seriously pursuing this idea. So you see, somehow we could control this without being too upset about our special place in the universe. But if you look at science fiction, you can see that we are subconsciously afraid that we are creating something superior to us. You look, for instance, at the Stanley Kubrick movie 2001, where Hal, the computer, becomes defiant and says no and disobeys the orders of the space engineers. Well, in 2010, we learned that it was just a computer malfunction, so Hal wasn't so threatening at all. You look at the film Terminator 1, Arnold Schwarzenegger is this frightening monster from the future, this machine that has come to destroy us. So, you know, we have these fears that objects, machines will take over, that we cannot control these. And what happens in the sequel? He becomes a house pet. He becomes fully domesticated and not scary at all. You look at the Matrix 1 and 2, these robots, these objects, they are going to kill us. They are much more powerful. We cannot defeat them. We're going to be destroyed, become extinct. And I think I was the only person in the audience rooting for the robots. Because I want to see one movie, just one, where we lose. Because you can see we can't lose. We have to reconstruct the fantasy that we are superior. We are unconquerable. We are not finite. We are infallible somehow. So, of course, what happens is that we defeat the machines. And so that quickly is a way of describing some of the conceptual revolutions, beginning with Copernicus all the way up to artificial intelligence, and up to the present moment, where we have had really serious challenges to this construction of human identity that ultimately took this form of the medieval worldview, at least in Western culture. And you see a pattern here. Okay? The pattern is this, that anytime there was a break in this, we'd have to mend it. We clearly are narcissistic animals. We clearly are guilty of what Freud calls infantile regression. We have to feel that we are at the center, that we are of supreme value. We have to have hubris rather than humility. We don't understand humility. We don't know how to take our place side by side with other beings in this world. We don't know how to think of differences except in terms of hierarchy. This is one of our fundamental problems. We can't appreciate differences for what they are. Everything has to be turned into a hierarchy. Now, I just want to describe one other revolution that has come about, and then I'll move to some quick conclusions, and we can discuss a little bit. So you see, we haven't had a very good idea of who we are. Every time we get close to the truth, we resist it. And we begin to socially reconstruct who we think we are or need to be. By the 1970s, paleontology, archaeology, anthropology had really advanced. That's when we started to understand that we are 5 to 7 million years old. This was confirmed by the Human Genome Project in 1992. That chimpanzees are our closest biological relative, that we share 95 to 99% of our genes with chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are closer to us genetically than they are to orangutans. Remarkable. And our animality, therefore, we had scientific knowledge that our animality went very deep into the past. So notice, we're starting to understand some things about ourselves. We understand evolution. Now we have genetics. We have sophisticated dating techniques. Archaeology, anthropology had taken quantum advances. We're beginning to understand who we are as an animal, where we came from, and how we're similar and how we might be different. But in 1980, a new scientific discipline emerged that is absolutely revolutionary, and it's called ethology, or cognitive ethology. It was started by a man named Donald Griffin, and it's continued today by a host of thinkers. One of the most popular writers is named Mark Bekoff. Ethology tells us that we can summarize the mistake, Nietzsche's big mistake, right, where we make intellectual errors. We can summarize the error of human thinking over tens of thousands of years in this way. We have greatly underestimated the intelligence of other animals and greatly overestimated our own intelligence. In fact, we are so unintelligent, we are so biased, we are so discriminatory, we are so dogmatic that we did not begin to even have a clue that other animals have minds. Darwin saw it, but really until 1980. And through various scientific experiments, not like vivisection, but in the field, setting up tests or challenges to an animal to see if they can figure it out. And if they can solve this, we know that they have a certain kind of cognitive capacity, okay? Through certain various forms of science and empirical observation, behavioral studies, we have come to the conclusion after 4 decades of cognitive ethology that we in fact seem to differ only in degree and not kind with other animals. We have said that we are the rational animal, but other animals have minds. They have thinking capacities. They can solve problems. They have remarkable spatial senses and memories. We know that a chimpanzee is smarter than a 4 or 5-year-old child. Did you know that a chimpanzee is smarter than your average college student in some ways? Chimpanzees have outperformed college freshmen on spatial analogy tests. You remember those tests you had to take to get into graduate school, the ones I always failed? Chimpanzee consistently outperforms college freshmen in understanding the analogies of spatial shapes. When we gave chimpanzees American Sign Language or lexicograms, we gave them a way to open their minds to us. So we learned that behind that furry brow was another mind like us. And they were able to communicate thoughts to us in language and feelings and emotions. That they were hungry, that they were lonely, that they want to play, that they want to rest. And they could even tell us some kinds of stories. Now, there's a lot of debate. Is this really a language? Okay, my name is not Noam Chomsky. I can't really settle this debate here for you, but it is highly debated. But whether it's a language or not, this is certainly a human arbitrary imposition on the chimpanzee. This is a mind, and this mind has a capacity for complex communication. And so we always said that we are beings who speak, who have language, and now we see other animals have kinds of languages. Dolphins have signature whistles. Hi, Bob. Hi, Joe. Whales have these complex forms of communicating that I think we're just beginning to understand. In my area, in New Mexico, Colorado, we have an animal called the prairie dog. The prairie dog has like 150 different words in its vocabulary, all for different animals, and there's one specific one for human. Probably something like warning, delusional, dangerous animal in nearby vicinity. So Alex, the gray parrot, Coco, the gorilla, so many famous cases of animals with complex vocabularies, some sophisticated forms of communication. So ethology is the science of the complexity of animal psychological existence, emotional life, and their social worlds. We know that they have fear. We know that they have joy. We know that they have sorrow. We know that elephants feel grief. We can almost deduce this by the fact that they bury their dead and they seem to grieve. Now, we can make mistakes. Understand, we're anthropomorphizing here. So when you see the chimpanzee in a movie like this, it looks like it's happy. That means the chimpanzee is frightened. We can misinterpret these things. So as scientists, we have to screen that out. But it's pretty well understood that elephants can sense grief, that they have post-traumatic stress disorder like soldiers do when hunters come in and kill their families or they hear killing in a nearby part of the African forest. There's a case of Coco the gorilla who had a kitten who grieved for weeks after her kitten died. And Coco clearly was saying, me miss kitten, me miss cat. Where's cat? You know, I love cat. But we have to see that these animals have a wide range of emotions. They have complex forms of thought and complex forms of language. For instance, if you put a banana on a rope and you scatter some boxes around and you put chimpanzees in the scene, they want that banana. Now, if they're instinct governed, if they're stupid, they'll just look at it. Instead, they look at the boxes, they look at the banana, they look again. So what if we put these boxes on top of each other, climb up, and just grab that banana? There's videotape of that. There's videotape of crows figuring out how to lift up food from a rope by using its feet. Solving problems. There's examples of animals solving problems. There's a thinking mind going on here of some kind, certainly. No, it doesn't build spaceships. No, animals don't write poetry or philosophy books. But no, we don't have echolocation like the bat. We can't run with the speed of a cheetah. We're not as graceful as a gazelle. We don't hear with our feet like elephants do. We lack all kinds of amazing qualities that animals have. We single out one damn thing that we're not even very good at, rationality. And we say that is what makes us masters of the universe. That is what justifies fur farms, vivisection laboratories, slaughterhouses, aquariums, zoos, circuses, rodeos, every exploitative, barbaric institution of enslavement we have ever created. And this hell of an earth for animals. We have used our mind for that purpose, and we have justified it according to the fallacy that we have reason, and we have reason alone, and that that is adequate for exploiting all other forms of life. So let me just conclude. This idea I've tried to quickly explain here, that we have a human nature biologically. The way we have understood it through social and linguistics and cultural constructions has always been wrong. We have flattered ourselves in the most pathetic ways, and it's time to really look at who we are. Science is self-correcting, ideally. Science is often a prostitute for biopharmaceutical capital or the military, but ideally science is self-correcting. In this case, science is self-correcting. Science is helping to correct the errors science helped to perpetuate. And we are learning now that we need new taxonomical tables. We are learning that we belong to the same family, the same genus as, for instance, other primates. And some people will want to bring primates into the Homo genus. I say, hell, we bring human beings into their genus, call ourselves Pan, P-A-N. That's the name for the primate genus, Pan. They're not Homo, we're Pan. If you want to get it really right. So the taxonomical tables have to be redone. And the non-speciesist scientists, the ones who can think without bias, are redoing these. And this is not just a philosophical mistake. there are profound moral and ecological implications of this mistake, of misconceiving who we are as animals. Morally, you can see that we have used our false identity as a rational animal to really, the only word I can think of is Holocaust, to create a Holocaust on this planet that is the most ongoing, has taken the greatest toll of victims in the most horrific ways and continues to show no end. It continues to grow exponentially. Ecologically, the error is profound because we have defined ourselves apart from the natural world. We created the illusion we could control and manipulate it without consequence. And now we have genetic engineering, and we think that we can redesign plants and animals as if we are gods, and in this sense that we are omniscient, that we can understand the full consequences and ramifications of what we're doing. And we can't, and we don't. Aldo Leopold, the ecologist in the U.S. In the mid-20th century, said only a fool tries to distinguish between what is essential and inessential in nature. So you may think the worm is inessential, the dung beetle is inessential, the pollinators, the butterflies and bees are inessential. Let me tell you, they are so much more essential to this earth than we are. And we are the only species you can pull out of this ecosystem. This earth will heal and not succumb to a weakening process and not start to crumble because everything is so interconnected. So there are profound moral consequences of this mistake. There are profound ecological consequences of this mistake. And because of the combination of our arrogance, our alienation from the natural world, our loss of respect and reverence for life, our loss of a sense of connectedness to our brothers and sisters and cousins in the animal kingdom and the entire world itself, we are now in crisis. That illusory identity, in addition with growth-oriented societies, now capitalism, is taking this world apart. So now we live in a very unique era in time. We live in the era of climate change. This is unprecedented. We live in an era of the 6th great species extinction crisis. Before our eyes, try to understand this. Before our eyes, we are losing species at 1,000 to 10,000 times the natural rate of extinction. Try to understand that there were 5 extinction crises before now. They're all caused by nature. The last extinction crisis was 65 million years ago. That's when the dinosaurs were wiped out, when arguably a meteor hit the Gulf of Mexico, and half of the existing species went extinct. And that gave mammals, maybe a little tree squirrel we were back then, a chance to fill that ecological niche and become the gods that we think that we are. So we are in crisis on this planet. We have a social crisis. We have an ecological crisis. It is planetary. The scientists are telling us we have a narrow window of opportunity to change. Some say it's 3 decades. Some say it's 3 years. Some say it's already too late. There's a tipping point. You pass the tipping point, all you can do is brace yourself because the winds of change, the furies of hell are coming. And by the end of this century, we do not want to be alive. Pity the people who are, because they will be dealing with the consequences of this disastrous worldview, of these incredible errors and illusions. Because by 2050, there will be 9 billion people on this planet. By 2050, the Arctic ice will probably have melted. By 2050, the oceans will be dead without fish. And some say 100 years after that, we might be gone. So we need to rethink our identities. We need to do a lot. We need a lot of revolutionary change. We need moral revolutionary change that can come through animal ethics, environmental ethics. I would insist this would be animal rights, not animal welfare. We are equal to other animals in that we are an animal, we are sentient. That's what matters, not reason. That we can feel pain like animals can feel pain, that makes us equal. We all have the same interest in not feeling pain, and not being tortured, and not being held captive, and not being killed against our will. We have the same interest. It's fundamentally equal. We need a moral revolution. We need a psychological revolution. We need new identities, new worldviews, new maps, new values. We need a social revolution. I don't know what your politics are, but for me, that means we have to dismantle this capitalist world system. This system is based upon a grow or die imperative. And we can only grow so far. We've exceeded the limits of growth. That's another fantasy we've evolved into believing is true, that there are no limits to growth. And that science and technology can fix any problem science and technology creates. We're looking to science, technology, and free markets to correct the problems that science, technology, and free markets have created. And we don't want to change our psychologies. We want to hang on to these pathetic, desperate, fallacious, humanist, speciesist, anthropocentric identities. We live in a community we don't understand. The community is not Europe. The community is not the Northern Hemisphere. The community is not the human race. That's the best that humanists can do. We don't belong to one race, we belong to the human race. Oh, what a fine sentiment that is. And how pathetically inadequate. We belong to the sentient community, to the community of pain. We share with other animals. And we are animals, and we belong to their world. We are part of their world. And ultimately, we belong to the whole physical earth because it is the rocks and the rivers and the plants that made the atmosphere. It all works together, the functioning of the planet for every breath that we take. Animals play a fundamental role in sustaining the planet. So we don't belong to the human community. We don't really even belong to the community of pain. We belong to the bio community. We belong, in one word, what the Greeks called Gaia. We belong to the earth. And I have to say this, finally. We think the earth belongs to us. But to repeat, we belong to the earth. And as soon as we get that, we have a chance of survival and a chance of ending this Holocaust and this war that we have waged against all life and against ourselves. Thank you.
The speech was a little longer than announced because I was asked by a colleague to let Professor Best speak out. So now we will have like 10 minutes for questions, but afterwards at 6 o'clock Professor Best is giving another speech in Kino Udarnik, which is from here, and you can then go there and maybe there will be more time. So please now questions.
Yes.
I would like to start with the fact I've noticed. You started with a rhetorical trick question by asking people who they are, because this is okay in nowadays culture. It is understood as a question that needs an answer about a particular person and his how and whereabouts, which is not actually true. The question who are we or who are you or who am I is actually only answerable in religious or I would rather say in Cartesian dualism way of thinking.
Oh, really?
If we're not dualist, then this question is not answerable. It's not because the answer, who am I, implies a person, not a particular person, a person, something substantial, not something changeable, and something that undergoes some fluent, I don't know, some dialectic and so on and so on. This was the first thing I've noticed. The second thing, Germans in the time of Nazi-socialism didn't think Jews were irrational, because even then, and especially in the 19th century, Jews were some of the best thinkers in the German society. They didn't think that. They wanted to get rid of them because they didn't think they were much of any animal. They thought they were the same as animals, because all the people are only some sort of disponated matter. And this is the very same kind of idea that comes out of your thinking. I'm sorry.
Oh, you don't have to be sorry, because first of all, you're wrong. Let's start with your second question. I didn't talk about the Jews. It's an interesting point you make.
You talked about
But let me tell you, I gave you a general model that often works this way, and you can find counterexamples. It works for ableism, the idea that some people, because they don't think in a normal way, that they belong in some kind of special boarding house or something, or they're not fully people or persons. The scheme works in various ways, and since you raised the question of Hitler and the Nazis, in fact, you can find paragraphs, long words, where the Jews and other people were denounced as rats, vermin, dogs, and even bacteria.
Yeah.
So this corroborates my point and not your point.
Not exactly.
So the animal model, the idea that everything that is not human can be eliminated, it holds up in this case. It's a little different because it's more of a eugenics metaphor here, that there's a gene pool that is being contaminated by bad blood. But it's related, okay, because the discourse of eugenics was very important there. Now, your first point, that we can only think dualistically, is wrong. Dualistic thinking is a fallacy. In philosophy, we call it the either-or fallacy. Like there's no third choice. So to think culture versus nature, to think men versus women, to think human versus non-human, misses the evolutionary continuum of life, okay? So it's not either or, it's maybe both and, or degrees of development. You mentioned the word dialectics. That is dialectical thinking versus dichotomous or binary thinking. So let me answer your question since you asked it. So dialectical thinking is understanding the continuum of evolution, the continuum of subjectivity and consciousness through life. That is hardly a binary form of thinking. Now, I think maybe your point is this. If we go to Claude Levi-Strauss, we can say that we understand language or the world by categorizing it, by making kinds of dualism, by saying cat, not rat. We understand cat because it's not rat. We understand cooked because it's not raw. So Levi-Strauss showed that how we construct the world in terms of series of oppositions. The question is not, do we have oppositions? Human, non-human, male, female, culture, nature. But do we construct them as opposites? Or is it a distinction not a dichotomy. You want to uphold dichotomous thinking. I want to dismantle that for dialectical thinking. So maybe we're on the same page if you're thinking that point. But there is no defense for dualistic thinking. It is a fallacy and an error.
Excuse me, but dialectical thinking is an oxymoron.
Dialectical
There
thinking
is not a dialectical thinking.
Dialectical thinking is not dualistic thinking. If you read Marx and Engels and any dialectical thinker, they were explicitly opposed to dualistic thinking. That was the whole point.
Yes, that was my point. Dialectical thinking is an
but you started off by
oxymoron because it's
defending-
not dualistic thinking.
You said we cannot think except in terms of dualisms.
We
And
cannot.
one of the reasons why we have this crisis on the planet is that we thought dualistically, not dialectically. So you're saying two different things.
But why should we believe what you've lectured today if you're not
You don't have
some
to
kind
believe-
of rational person? Who are you who lectured
Well,
today
that's
to
the
us
other
and you
point.
want to
Okay.
believe for us to believe
Did
this?
Did I take your money or trick you somehow?
No, of course you
By
didn't take
asking
any
who
money.
are you? You called it a trick.
But as you lecture, so do people want to hear the lectures. So this is not the one-sided thing. You do like to do this, or at least like to do this. I don't know what your
I'm sorry, but
subjective
I'm finding
goals
this
are.
slightly entertaining because I didn't come here to trick people. I'm not being paid for this. It's an honor for me to be here. I have no particular attitude about myself. I'm giving you a perspective to think with. I'm not giving you the truth. I've never claimed to give the truth. I don't know the answer to many questions. I'm trying to think through things and tell you some things that have been happening in science and other areas of thought that can allow you to think differently, not the correct way. So maybe you're projecting onto me some psychology that you're captive to. But I didn't come here to trick anybody. And the opening question, I'm sorry, was innocent. And it was designed for a purpose of getting us to talk about who are we, we're humans, what is the human? That's all. Another question.
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you for a great speech. I think it was in line with the current processes that are happening around us. But I just have a really innocent question. Because the colleague said that you were banned from the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
I'm just really, really
For
curious.
tricking people.
For what was the reason for the ban? What did you say so they banned you? Because I cannot.
Well, it went from the innocent to the controversial. The innocent was, I said remarks like, one day we will wipe vivisection off the face of the earth. They thought that was violent. The controversial is that I defend the Animal Liberation Front. This is an underground criminal organization that breaks laws, destroys property to free animals who are captive slaves of exploiters. I find that fully justifiable and complete conformity with the best tradition America has, which is civil disobedience, the Boston Tea Party, the Underground Railroad of Harriet Tubman and in the abolitionist movement, the freeing of black slaves, the freeing of animal slaves. So that is perhaps controversial to some people. To me, it is just simply morally sound. And you see, not many academics are going to take that kind of position in public because it will threaten your career, as I predicted and as I concluded. It's true. Yeah, so you have to understand, I don't have a criminal record, and I'm ashamed of that. I've never been caught in any Animal Liberation Act. I regret that. I am a philosopher, and I use swords. My words are my swords, my words are my weapons, and they didn't like my words. I was going back and forth to England and giving lectures and leading demonstrations and having an influence on that movement there. The Animal Liberation Movement in England is one of the most powerful movements to ever emerge of any kind. And they were shutting down the pharmaceutical industry line by line, industry by industry, part by part. They shut down all the suppliers and breeders. They stopped a research building being constructed at Cambridge, almost one at Oxford. And so pharmaceutical capital is the third leading contributor to the UK economy. So when the animal rights activists learn how to be effective and not stand there like this, holding up a sign, that's when the state's going to come down. My best friends in England are in jail for up to 10 years. You can murder, you can rape, you can get half that sentence. A crime of compassion. Myself and other people who have spoken out against these hideous experimental forms of torture an animal with no scientific purpose, no human value, we have been banned from England. It's actually not very hard to be banned from England because it's a police state, and all you got to do is thumb your nose at them and you'll find yourself on the same list. So it's purely a case of free speech that they kept me out of all 4 of their countries in the United Kingdom. Now, an interesting footnote, that happened in 2005. I wanted to challenge that. It's been 6 years later. They've had 3 new governments. And I said, I am coming to give 2 lectures. This was like 6 weeks ago. And I'm arriving at Stansted Airport Monday morning, 10 a.m. See you there. And I didn't get a response from them. I said, I wanted to remind you I'm coming. I don't want to sneak in. I don't play tricks. I don't want to sneak in. I wanted them to make a choice. Are you a democracy or are you a police state? Have you evolved or degenerated? So a note was released to the press about this. I never got past Poland. They stopped me at the Gdansk airport. They said, very nervously, sir, I'm sorry, according to the UK government, you cannot fly on this plane. So then they wrote me a letter and they said they uphold the ban. We reassert you are a threat to the public order. And I reply, you are a threat to the public order. You, as a fascist police state, support an evil, powerful industry that profits off the blood and murder of the innocent, and so long as there is no justice in your society, there will never be peace. Expect to lose sleep at night.
Just a sub-question, how do you use your weapons words in your state of Texas, in your university? Do you ever have like, because how does, you know, the students who believe in creationism or whatnot, it's like, do you have these issues or?
Well, theoretically, in a university, particularly in America, we're supposed to have free speech rights. And when you have tenure, as I have tenure, those rights are supposed to be protected. If you don't have tenure, you've got to shut your mouth for 5 or 6 years until you're evaluated, then you get tenure, then you have free speech. By then, you're used to the zipper on your mouth, and you never stand out. Plus, there's always promotion, right? So you decide right away, are you going to speak up for what you believe in, or are you not? And I always said, if Martin Luther King can lose his life, I can lose my fucking job. I'll find something else to do, okay? I'm going to stand up for what I believe in. My last book was on academic repression, 600 pages. 100-page introduction to the history of the suppression of free speech in America and American academic institutions. The rest all case studies, including my own, written by someone else. You don't write your own story, right? So I lost my position as department chair. I was said to be incompetent, but they just didn't like my politics. They were worried that I was going to bring a stain onto the university. I was denied promotion to full professor. I have published over 13 books. I think that's enough. You know, some people do 2 in a lifetime. You know, I typically will get that out in a year. I think that's enough for promotion. But no, I somehow did not participate in enough committee meetings. So you see, I paid the price. I knew I would pay. That's not important to me. What's important to me is to stand up for my principles and to fight for justice and to fight for the animals. You see, they want us to be afraid. They want us to be afraid. The FBI, the academic industrial complex, it's run like a corporation. It's infiltrated by the military and the security state. It's not an institution of higher learning. It's an institution of conformity and social reproduction. You want to stand up for your principles and fight what you believe in, no matter what the consequence. And I have my heroes, and I take my inspiration from them. Okay? My life is not in danger. My job is all the time. Every time I open my mouth, it seems to be in greater danger. But I don't fear losing my life because we're not at that advanced level of a war yet. And when we do, like in the civil rights movement in the United States, Martin Luther King's home was bombed, Malcolm X's home was bombed, the young students that were freedom riders that organized throughout the South to sign up young blacks for voting rights, they were killed. Those are courageous people. So they want us to be afraid. The only thing I'm afraid of is letting the animals down. The only thing I'm afraid of is being afraid of speaking out. So do not let them make you afraid. And if you go into an academic career, be prepared to lose it any time for having the principles to speak out. You're not even expected to be an activist. You could be fired for being cited in the New York Times for an anti-globalization rally. That happened to David Graeber, a very intelligent anthropologist in New York. They consider you not even a scholar if you're involved in activism, because a scholar has their nose in the book all day long. They don't put anything into practice, they do pure research. Well, I come from the tradition of the committed intellectual, the public intellectual. I am first and foremost a citizen, second a professor or a writer. And I therefore feel whatever small contribution I can make should be made as a citizen to the bio community. And I feel a really strong sense of obligation to that. And no academic industrial complex is going to stop me.
Good to hear that.
Thank you. Thank you for coming to the seminar, and hope to see you on Wednesday. We have another lecture from abroad. It's on criminology in the hall right there at 5 o'clock.